Welcome to another episode of the And Both podcast. Today, Lee Sevier joins me in the studio. We are talking about the nitty-gritty of the And Both career and parenthood. So Lee is a former big law lawyer in New York City who pivoted when her kids were little after realizing that the hours involved in law and the hours involved in parenthood held a lot of overlap. So throughout this episode, we're going to discuss the trade-offs and how those decisions impact in the moment and they impact down the line, along with experiences that she pulls in related to one of her kids being in therapy and how the decision that she made to pivot away from law and be home with her kids while she had the opportunity to do that and made that decision, how that impacted her ability down the line when it came to that, and what the pivot is going to look like or starting to look like as her children are older and growing and carrying on with their own lives. Thank you for joining me today. And as always, please like, subscribe, and leave a review for the show. It helps us to spread the word and it helps other people to hear these conversations just like this one. Hello and welcome to the And Both podcast. Here we are going to hear from moms and those in motherhood that are doing the thing that works for them. They are honoring themselves alongside the all-encompassing role and level of expectation that is modern motherhood. And we are going to hear from as many different people as possible in their own experience. So you can find people to relate to. You can hear stories that will make you laugh, make you cry, all of the above, and that we will come together as a community to support one another in a way that is holistic and honoring of the woman and the mother as a whole. Welcome to another episode of the And Both podcast. Today, Lee Sevier joins me in the studio. We are talking about the nitty-gritty of the And Both career and parenthood. So Lee is a former big law lawyer in New York City who pivoted when her kids were little after realizing that the hours involved in law and the hours involved in parenthood held a lot of overlap. So throughout this episode, we're going to discuss the trade-offs and how those decisions impact in the moment and they impact down the line, along with experiences that she pulls in related to one of her kids being in therapy and how the decision that she made to pivot away from law and be home with her kids while she had the opportunity to do that and took that and made that decision, how that impacted her ability down the line when it came to that, and what the pivot is going to look like or starting to look like as her children are older and growing and carrying on with their own lives. So thank you for joining me today. And as always, please like, subscribe, and leave a review for the show. It helps us to spread the word, and it helps other people to hear these conversations just like this one. Hello, and welcome back to the And Both podcast. I am here today with Lee Sevier. Welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
I'm really excited for this conversation for a number of reasons, which we'll undoubtedly get into. But before we get into that, can you let people know what you want them to know about you?
Sure. Well, I am a mom to 4 kids. I have a 14-year-old who just started high school this year, so that's all new and exciting. And then a 6th grader who's 12, a 4th grader who's 10, and a 5-year-old. 3 boys, 1 girl. And then we have 3 dogs and a pet scorpion as well, because my 14-year-old talked me into that one. So there we are.
Yep. I have a friend who has 3 boys and a girl, and she is the proud parent of a dragon lizard.
A bearded dragon?
A bearded dragon, yes. Yes. She was like, I have this bearded dragon. And I was like, I had an aquatic frog and like that was it. And of course, like I'm in the phase with one of my kids right now where it's like, how about a snake? And I'm like, not living here. How about like this? And I'm like, why are these things getting progressively worse? Like you're going in the wrong direction.
Well, I put, in order for him to get the scorpion, I put out what I thought were super hard hurdles. I was like, you have to do this for 3 months. You have to save up your money. And while I want my children to succeed, I've never been so bummed that a child fulfilled all of those things. And then I had to get the scorpion. So
that's like the most spot on thing about parenting, right? It's like, I saw this meme the other day and they're talking about like, my kids tell me that I'm wrong all day, but I'm the one who finds their shoes in the front hallway kind of thing.
Yep.
It was like,
yep.
You never know the motivation of your children when it becomes the thing that you want least in the world.
Yep, exactly.
Scorpion.
Yep.
Bless all of that went into that. That is a pile of no thank you.
Well, and then it's even worse. So my 5-year-old, the scorpion eats crickets, which is horrendous. But my 5-year-old loves these crickets and thinks they're like his buddies. So we have this separate cricket cage where, and sometimes one will just run away at night. And I tell my older kids, I'm like, he can never know the truth of what happens to those poor little crickets at night. He just has to think they run away.
And then don't you walk around with like when like the house is all tuned up and people are like about to be completely unhinged and you're like, I know the cricket story's coming. Like you have that like as you can say whatever you want, you can do whatever you want, but you keep the crickets on lock and key. Everybody, like
absolutely.
General understanding.
He can never know.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
There is no fear like that fear of being like, let's try and settle the tide, but also like we can never get to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That bridge.
Yep.
Oh my gosh. So the thing that I wanted to ask about, because I saw this and I was like, ooh, fun. Law. What type of law did you practice?
So I worked for Big Law and I did labor and employment law management side. So I represented corporations in union negotiations and represented them when employees would make a claim against them.
Gotcha. Okay. So you did that for how long and like how did the kids feed into this? Because the thing that you wrote in was like, I did this thing. I did a big thing. I was a big law lawyer and then realized that doing that career 100 miles an hour and parenting 100 miles an hour cannot actually happen. Like you cannot drive 100 miles an hour in two different directions.
No.
So how did that all layer in for you?
Yeah. So I graduated law school. I'm a summer associate, got a great job at a big law firm, and everything was great. I was married, and my husband was getting his MBA and working. So we're both going 100 miles an hour, but we also knew we wanted a family. So I had my first child. I'd been working for 2 years at that point, and everything was great. My firm was awesome. I got 6 months of maternity leave, which is like unheard of in most places.
Wow.
I mean, oh yeah, they were fantastic. I mean, it was all intents and purposes, it was fantastic. But you work really hard, especially in big law. It's long hours. And once I got off maternity leave and went back, I found it so hard. I'm the type of person that I give 100% to everything. And I felt like I was failing on both fronts. I felt like I was failing at work because I couldn't give 100%. And I felt like I was failing at home because I couldn't give 100%. So I would set up my day where I would go in the office. I'd normally drop my son off at daycare at like 7 a.m. I mean, early. And then I would be the mom straggling in at like 6:30 at night, right as the daycare's closing, to pick him up, bring him home, feed him dinner, spend time with him, put him to bed. And then a lot of nights I would go back to the office and work until midnight and then rinse and repeat the same day. And then on the weekends, I would set my alarm for 4 a.m. I would go in the office, work until 7 a.m, come home so that I could be home before he woke up for the day and spend all day with him. So you're trying to do both. You're trying to be everything to everyone. And meanwhile, my poor husband is like I mean, I don't even think he got any time because you're just trying to juggle both because you want both. I mean, I worked really hard to get my law degree and I worked really hard to get this fantastic job in big law. And I was really, really proud of that. But I was also really, really proud of being a mom. And I wanted to spend time with my son and pour my energy into my son. And it just, something had to give. I just couldn't give everything to everyone. I was exhausted and I wasn't doing a great job at my job and I wasn't doing a great job of being a mom. I mean, I wasn't. And some people can, and I envy that. I really do, because I think it'd be awesome to have both, but I wasn't able to. And so my husband called me one day at work and said, "Hey, I got a job offer in Texas. What would you think about moving there?" And I wasn't licensed in Texas and I hadn't worked long enough to get reciprocity. And I was like, maybe this is the thing that has to give. And so I left my job and we moved to Texas and I became a stay-at-home mom to my then 2-year-old. And it was so bizarre. It was like I kept saying to my husband, I'm like, it's like I'm in the witness protection program because my world is so different. Like I was, in New York City working this big job and being pulled a million directions and yes, you make a lot of money, but you never have time to spend it or do anything or, have a life outside of your work. And so it was so bizarre. But I'll tell you, when I was leaving my firm, I had a few attorneys come in, and they close the door quietly, right? And they say, "I really wish I had done the same." And these are older attorneys who are partners and super successful at what they do. And it was just a little bit sad because I think if more people talked about trying to juggle both things and feeling like they're failing at both, I think maybe there could be room at the table for everybody. I don't think people would have to feel that regret of feeling like they wish they had taken the time at home. Or conversely, feeling like, when I've started my kids are in school, so I want to throw my hat back in the workforce. And so I actually went back and joined LinkedIn again. And I'm seeing all my old colleagues and they have these amazing jobs, like they're all super successful. And, that bit of like, gosh, seeing what you could have had, seeing that. And not that I regret staying home with my children because it was amazing. But it is that second of like, gosh, that could have been mine, and I think there's room for people to have both if people weren't so nervous to talk about feeling like they're failing at things.
Yeah. I think I agree. I think it's so important to point out like a lot of times the wanting to do both and being able to do both somehow when it doesn't happen in the way that you want it to, that there's this layer of like personal failing that gets put on that. And like, does that come from expectations of corporate America? Does that come from expectations of ourselves? Does that come from expectations of on a Saturday morning after you've been in the office for 3 hours and you are like, eyes are going in 2 different directions, but you're standing on the playground with the cup of coffee the size of your head going, yep, I want this. And knowing like deep down that you want this, however, being so unbelievably exhausted mentally, physically, all of that you're like, I don't even like, you don't have the energy to enjoy the thing that you're working so hard to have the energy for.
That's absolutely right. And I think it's both. I mean, I think a lot of it was self-imposed. I think I did a lot of it to myself. I am a perfectionist and I have anxiety, right? So I'm just constantly questioning myself and holding myself up to this standard. But I think a lot of it is corporate America too. I remember, when I was practicing, it's a big deal to be able to be the associate assigned to a trial because they don't happen frequently. Normally, cases are settled. Normally they're settled. Sometimes they're dismissed upon motion, but it's very odd to have a case that actually goes to trial. And one of the cases I was working on went to trial, and the partner, and I don't think he was, I think he was trying to be very nice. I don't think he was thinking he was putting pressure on me or, you know, discriminating against me or anything. I really do think he was trying to be a human being. And he said to me, well, with you being a new mom, do you think you'll have the time to work on this trial? And honestly, every part of me wanted to be like, yeah, absolutely. Because, I can do it all. I can be here 24 hours a day. But the reality is that like, I can't, I couldn't. Daycare isn't open 24 hours a day. And even if it were, would I want that? Would I want my son, would I want to not see my son? Because trials are not short. It's, it takes a long time to prep for them. And it's a lot of work. But, on the other hand, would he have asked a dad that question? Or would a dad have felt that pressure to be there 24 hours a day? And not that dads aren't wonderful, but I feel like a lot of pressure is placed on moms in particular. And moms are just as much in the workforce as dads. When they're at their job, they're there. And I do wonder, while he was trying to be super nice, I do wonder, what if he asked a male associate who had just had a baby the same question? And the answer is probably not.
Yeah. Yeah. And if he had asked a male associate that question, would their first thought have been, I really want to do this, but I'm not going to be able to spend as much time juggling that, like that.
Right.
How is that going to impact the juggle?
Right. Because typically women are the default parent. I mean, that's regardless of stay at home or working, women are typically the default parent. It just, but then it turned out, well, I loved being home with the kids. It was fantastic. I got involved in every sort of activity with them. It was fantastic. We would go to museums and we would go to zoos and parks, and it was awesome. And then even more important, we had our fourth child, and, we started to notice that he was not meeting the milestones like our other kids did. Not that you compare kids, but when it's your fourth, you sort of have like, okay, we think he should be crawling by now. We think he should be doing all these things by now, and he isn't. And of course, this is like during COVID, so it takes forever to get into doctors and doing everything. And so he would meet every milestone. It would just be really late. Like, he walked at 15 months. And so, but then he was 2 and he still wasn't talking. And we were like, okay, this is, we have to start speech therapy. And since it was COVID, everything was online. And you can imagine trying to get a 2-year-old to sit still while some woman is talking to them about, okay, now say this and do that. I mean, it was a disaster. And so finally, when everything went back in person, he still has no words. And then, his speech therapist said, and he moves a little clumsier than the other patients I see. And so we brought him to physical therapy, and, very long story short, we brought him to developmental pediatricians, neurologists, everything. He has a condition called developmental coordination disorder, aka global apraxia, which is basically a diagnosis of an exclusion. So they ruled out, we did all the genetic testing. So they ruled out all the, those things. We did a brain MRI, ruled out cerebral palsy, all these things.
All the big scaries.
All the big scaries. So he has this condition, which requires, it's treatable in the way that it just requires lots and lots of therapies. And so then it brought on being a stay-at-home mom in a whole new way, because then you're driving to and from all these therapies and realizing, one, I don't know how working parents would do this. If I still worked, sure, if I was a billionaire and I could hire somebody to take my son to do all of these, then yes, okay, great. But honestly, it's more than just driving to these therapies. I would sit in these therapy sessions. He did PT, physical therapy, he did occupational therapy, and he did speech therapy. And these are an hour snippets in a week. But as the parent of a special needs child, you go in those sessions with your kids so that you can see what they're working on so you can implement those things at home and work on them at home as well. So it's more than just hiring a driver to take your kid to and from places. And, you realize therapies are really a thing of privilege. My husband does well, and I was able to not work and to take him to all these and really pour all my energy into this. And not to mention that, but we were able to pay for these therapies. So that's the other snippet of this, is that our insurance, which we have great insurance, only covers 60 visits a year combined of these therapies. Well, he does 3 therapies once a week. So, we can do the math. That doesn't nearly cover the whole year. And, some diagnoses get unlimited therapies, but he doesn't have any. He's not autistic. Autism tends to get 100% covered, but he isn't. He has this developmental coordination disorder. So we get 60 a year, and thankfully we can pay for the other ones. But you realize, and this really became a passion of mine, because you realize that therapies for children shouldn't be considered a luxury, and they are. The only reason we were able to do all we could do for him is because we had the money and the time to do it. And now he's doing great. He's graduating from speech therapy in 6 months, and he attends a private kindergarten. Side note, I got a job as a part-time kindergarten aide.
What was your interview process? I have 4 kids. All right, come on in. You're not.
They were like,
more children.
Well, what happened is when all my kids went to school last year, I was like, well, I'm really bored. I have nothing to do all day. And so somebody mentioned, well, why don't you substitute teach? And I was like, okay. So I went to my kids' school and I started substitute teaching and loved it. And they were like, well, you don't have a teaching degree. You're just a lawyer. So why don't you get a job as a kindergarten aide? And I was like, okay, I can do that. Like, sure. And then this way I can also keep an eye on my kiddo who is not in my class. He's across the hall, and it's great. It's fantastic. So I do that 3 days a week. But anyway, so now it's sort of special education and insurance and all that has sort of become a little bit of a side project passion of mine. But, you have to make sure. And then the same pressure that goes with being a career mom, being a mom to a special needs child, not only is there pressure to make sure you're doing everything you can for them and really pouring 100% into that, but there's also the pressure of you have 3 other children. And, I heard the term glass child, where siblings of special needs children can get seen through. And that is such a fear of mine. I never want any of my children to feel like they are less important or worth less time because they don't have these special needs. So, as a mom, you're just pulled in a million different directions, making sure every single one of your kids is feeling loved and feeling like they are so important. And it's sometimes impossible, but you try your best. We all do, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think what people don't talk about enough when it comes to this idea of like doing it all, the real and both, is that we discount, when people look at it from the outside, they discount the amount of cognitive and emotional lift that goes into this, right? So it's like you have the ability on, if you look across the whole spectrum or the whole piece of the whole story, you have the ability to be home and drive your kid and do all of these things. And it's like, oh my gosh, if I had to work, how would that happen? But it wouldn't be, it's not just about the driving, like you say. It's like, how would I make sure that I am staying on top of all of this? And how would I make sure that I can sit in these therapy sessions? How would I make sure that when I'm not here, if my kid's in care or you hire somebody to come into the house or whatever, that they're going to continue to work on this stuff? Because, as a therapist, like, you give people get homework.
Right.
And especially in outpatient therapy, you can see people for, and this is more adults, but you can see people for 2 years because the only time they do any of the therapy is in therapy. They come in, they do their exercises, and you go through, some assessment pieces at different markers, and then you send them home with homework. So having someone that needs even, one of those therapies is you're trying to incorporate that piece into your house. You're also trying to incorporate that at the same time that you have other kids. If you have 1, 2, or 20 kids, 20 is extreme. But if you if you have anything other than that one sort of tunnel vision opportunity, it's just exponential. Like, we're not adding, it's exponents at this point. And so the piece that I appreciate a lot and talking about is that idea of like, it's not just a logistics of like, I need to be here at 8:00. It's, I need to be here at 8:00, but I'm thinking about where I need to be at 9:00, and I'm thinking about the thing that I have to remember for this afternoon and all of that stuff. That's the piece that impacts that being able to show up 100% at work, and it impacts being able to show up 100% at home, because you can't downshift if everything has to go so quickly.
Right. Absolutely. You're thinking about, you may be one place, but you're thinking about all the other things you have to do. And so thank goodness for iPhones, right? I've started setting myself reminders for everything. So like an alarm will go off at 12:30 and it'll be like, fill out the form for, Andrew's field trip. I mean, just random things, because I will forget them because there's a million things going on. Or do a quick wash for football tomorrow because he needs his uniform for the game. I mean, there's a million, and all those little things will get completely lost because it's hard to be present when there's so much clutter in your head,
Yeah.
and that's what a lot of it is. A lot of it's not meaningful necessarily. It's little random tasks that have to be done, but they take up space.
And those are also the tasks that nobody knows when you've done them, but everybody knows when you haven't done them.
Yes.
And then that's when you start pulling in the extra layer of crap, where you've got people that are like, I'm the hot mess mom, and I'm just running around with my giant Stanley cup and my yoga pants, and I can't get here on time, and blah blah blah. And then you're in your car on the phone, and people are like, oh, she's always on her phone. Or people, I like to be present with my kid, and you're like, well, I got an outpatient form to fill out, so do you want to supervise me filling this out, or could we all just assume I'm a grown up with a cell phone?
And everybody's so judgy. Like that's just the best. Everybody, I remember even like, those like baby center message boards or whatever those things are. I mean, we're going back to like 2009, 2010 when I had my first child. So when I was pregnant with him, I would go on these boards as I'm like drinking my Sprite and eating my McDonald's French fries. And these moms would be like, I was so bad today. I had, and it was like cue like Coke or Dr. Pepper or something. And it was like, okay, unless you're about to tell me like you drank the fifth of like vodka, like we don't need to go on and say you were so bad because you had a soda. And it's just, it's just this constant, like almost like one-upping of look at how perfect I can be. My child's not eating goldfish off the floor, which it's a constant feeling of like this. I have to show everybody that I can do things better. And that's just, it's sad and it's silly because we're all just trying to do our best. And whether you're a stay-at-home mom, whether you're a working mom, whether you feed your kids all organic or whether you don't, it doesn't, the kids are going to be all right. And I think we just have to stop putting so much pressure on each other to be whatever people perceive as perfect.
Yeah. And it too, like there's no relief from it.
Right.
I am loving every part of this episode. We are going to take a quick break and hear from one of our sponsors, but we'll be back.
Hi, Felicia. Hi, Felicia.
Mom.
Yes.
We have to record a podcast ad.
And what ad is that?
We're going to promote the podcast so we get more listeners. If somebody said to you, what's Hi Felicia about? What is it about? Our media diets.
Crapola.
For some reason, people really respect and honor our opinions because we watch it all. Did you finish Netflix yet?
Did I?
Check out the podcast. It's a mother-daughter relationship that's one for the books. So, Hi Felicia with Marnie and Felicia, anywhere you listen to podcasts.
My Felicia, bye, Felicia.
There's no, like, if you are scrolling online, there's people who are making, I watched a video yesterday and I couldn't look away. It was a 12-car wreck and I was just watching. It was a woman who decided that her kids woke her up and said that they wanted Fruit Loops for breakfast. And so she made Fruit Loops with like blueberry puree and like she made homemade Fruit Loops for her kid. My entire thought process through this whole thing, like this video is 3 minutes long, is I'm like, where is the volume? Because if my kids woke me up and said, hey, can we have Fruit Loops? First of all, there's a good chance that it's in the pantry and it glows in the dark and I'm going to pour it in a bowl. There's also a great chance that by the time I got through the process of making homemade organic puree, dust powder, whatever, they've already eaten half the stuff in the pantry and nobody actually wants it.
Absolutely.
Or it just, and so, yeah, so there's no relief, right? There's no relief in social media. There's no relief at the playground. There's no whatever. Like, I have rolled up to a playground and gotten out and like, you know, my husband had taken the kids and the diaper bag that we used or the thing that had the extra diapers was in his vehicle, not mine. And I get there and I'm like, well, that's a conundrum.
Thanks.
You know, and like I've been the mom with the one wipe and your kid is like got poop in their hair and you're just like, let's see how many millimeters of this thing we can get. And every time it's sort of like, oh, don't worry, like that happens to me too. And I'm like, I don't feel bad about this.
Right.
Like I refuse to think that I'm supposed to have it all figured out because I don't and nobody does. But if you pull out like a 17 serving organic snack tray thing, I am like, good on you, but I feel no responsibility to emulate that.
And I think it's wonderful. And, you know, but my kids would not, you know, and maybe this is reflection of me as a parent, my kids would not like wait around they'd be eating, you know, all the snacks like yours in the pantry before that was done. But I think it's wonderful if you can pull it off. You know, don't look at me like it's not wonderful that my kids are getting the Welch's fruit snacks under the seat in the car, because that's probably what's happening.
Yeah, like grab a snack and let's go. We can't. There's so much overthinking in terms of not overthinking parenting. Like I think there is a ton of stuff out there that's magical, right? Like car seat safety, smoking, you know, drugs and all of those interactions, right? Like you should not be cranking cigarettes in the front seat of a car with like a kid kind of buckled on the side. You should not. But we had to wait for science to catch up on that. You can't yes, that stuff is all now hilarious. But at one point in time, it was not hilarious. At one point in time, it was like, oh my God, I can't believe that you're doing this. And I just want the 80s feeling of like, let's just give each other the benefit of the doubt. And more importantly than anything else, let's give ourselves the benefit of the doubt, right? Like, let's just not take your Instagram life and your Facebook life and your park life and your school pickup life and all of that stuff. And instead of seeing those as like layers of input, we're taking it all as like really trying to make this very clear lens that we're only supposed to see parenthood through.
Well, yeah. And I think even more, you know, not to make it too deep, but I think this strive for perfection and this sort of perfect Instagram life, if you call it, I think that it's hurting our children, because I think this idea of perfection, I think, is being imposed on them too. And you see it a lot, you know, in schools, right? You'll hear teachers talk about when a child makes a mistake, a lot of parents are, oh, never, it can never be my kid. My kid would never do that. And not allowing your child to own up to their mistakes and really take responsibility for their actions. And I'm not saying every time. There are certainly circumstances where, yes, your little Susie did not do what she is being accused of doing. But for the most part, they did. And just own it. and let your child own it, because it's such an important part of growing up and being a contributing member of society, is taking responsibility for your actions and understanding that you make mistakes and kids make mistakes and nobody's going to be perfect. And if you never let your child think that they were in the wrong or that their behavior was wrong, we're raising members of society that will probably be pretty unpleasant to be around if they can never think that they're doing anything wrong. And it's dangerous. And it's, allowing children to make mistakes is such a gift you can give them, and and teaching them how to come back from it. So you fail a test. Okay, well, let's think about how you studied. Maybe you need a different study method. That's okay. All right, well, you were mean to a kid. Okay, well, you were mean to a kid. It happens, right? So let's figure out how you can remedy that and how you can be nicer next time, and what you can do to be kind. But creating this like, oh, my kid would never, or oh, I would never, is just such a dangerous mentality. And you're not doing your child any favors. And, and some kids can just be mean. And I know, I'm sure my own kids have been mean. Just this viciousness that I don't know if it was there when I was younger or I just didn't see it. But like, for example, my son, my 5-year-old in kindergarten, okay? Like kindergarten, when he went to this school, my concerns were academic. He needs OT, right? So his handwriting is not as great. His speech is great, but it's not completely understandable. And my big kids, their concern was that he'd be bullied. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's 5. And 5-year-olds aren't going to bully other 5-year-olds. Like, that doesn't happen. Like, no way. Kids won't even notice his differences. Like, not even going to happen. And they were like, yeah, just wait, Mom, just wait. Well, sure enough, they were right. I was wrong. and yeah, it's pretty horrible. The other day, these 3 boys, he was on the playground, and one came up and pushed him down on the ground, and he told him to stop. Then the other came up and hit him on the back and pushed him down to the ground, and he was screaming, stop. And then they put him in a chokehold and dragged him down to the ground. And then when he was down on the ground, they kicked dirt on him.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's horrible. These are 5-year-olds, and just awful. And, the teachers were on it. The kids got in trouble. The principal talked to them. But I was just shocked. I was shocked. I'm 5 years old, and in, it was just, it was unacceptable to me. And I have no idea why a 5-year-olds would do this. You hope that it's not because parents have set up this, my child would never. And so they feel like they can just do whatever they want. And I just, that's my really long way of saying that. I don't think we're doing our children any favors by pretending they can never do any wrong, because childhood is a great time to make mistakes, because the lessons to learn from these mistakes are so much less severe than when you're an adult and you're making mistakes. So it's way better to learn it now. And so ignoring what your children are doing is not helping them at all.
Have you read the book Never Enough by Jennifer Brahaney Wallace?
No, I haven't.
So she wrote this book. It's fairly recent, and it's about this idea that we live in such an achievement culture as people as like grown-ups ourselves. And the perfect storm of the like tiger mom, helicopter, lawnmower parent, whatever, like no strife for my child. But this pushing them, and they say like, I like dance when they're 3, and all of a sudden they're dancing 4 days a week. And everything is always to like the nth degree.
Right.
And how they're saying now that like with the rise of social media, kids have access to the same things that we have access to. And this idea of like, colleges $50,000, $60,000 a year. There's one in Connecticut that's really like just shy of $100,000 a year. Yeah. And so it's this idea of like, well, if you're going to go to college, because you have to go to college, which is left over from when we were younger. If you have to go to college, if you're going to go, you have to go on a scholarship. So how can we get you here? Or how can we do this? And it's this like, you suck all the joy out of it. But then also what kids are internalizing is, if I'm not perfect, if I'm not flawless, if I don't achieve this, then I have no value.
Right.
And how that is doubling down on the mental health crisis that is rampant in middle school and high school kids because they have access to social media. So that reinforces these like tidbits of feelings. But it's the next layer, right? Like, because this is the stuff that you live as a parent when you see all of that come in. Like, there is somebody at the playground who has, little like monogram Tupperware of all the snack things.
Right.
Should I be doing that? Are they doing it right? Are they okay? And then you go online and someone's making homemade Fruit Loops and you're like, well, I guess maybe, I don't really know. And so it's this like, if we are continuing to fall into that pattern and show that pattern, it would make sense that our kids would fall along those lines. Like you're saying, like we are the example of that.
Right.
And the question that I have, given the fact that you had this, you went to law school, which is not like simple. I think it's hilarious that someone was like, oh, you're a lawyer, but like, you're not a teacher. I love that.
Well, but it is so true though. These teachers are gold. Like they do things and I'm like, I have no idea. Like I could go to court and argue, but these teachers, they have the patience of saints.
Oh, when my kids were home, so my kids were home remote for 1 year and then they were virtual for another year. So for 2 of them, I did, I was their like facilitator. When they went back into school, I was like, tell me what you need. Yeah. I don't care. Like if you were like, I could really use a pony, I'd be like, giddy up. Like,
true.
And you got like 18 of them in a classroom or 12 of them or whatever. Like, I don't know what language you're speaking. I don't know what sort of magic fairy dust you are sprinkling around the classroom.
Absolutely.
Leave it here. I'll take the scraps at the end of the day. That's totally fine. But like, no, I am not.
I know. They are a special people because no.
Yeah. So how in the fact that you have like, you went in your own life down that tunnel of achievement and high level of commitment to this pursuit of this degree and the pursuit of this job and all of those things. Like, how do you make the balance work between like you live that experience and not saying to your kids, like, we do what we know, right? It's like, I went to school in a really intense way and I did this and this was the outcome of this. So when your kid comes home and it's like, hey mom, I failed my English test. Like, how do you manage that for yourself given your own spin on life?
Well, I think it's so growing up, my parents always pushed us to be the best that we could be, but they were also really good about emphasizing what is truly important in life. And that's, to some people it's different, but to me and my family, it's family, right? At the end of the day, nobody's going to remember what court case you won, but they will remember the time you spent, with them doing some hike or, and so they were really good at setting great values that you can have success, but at the end of the day, that's not the end all be all. And it's okay to make mistakes. And I was in high school, my first 2 years of high school were rough. And I just didn't care. I didn't do the work. I didn't care, but I came back from it. And so I think that was an important lesson for me because it tells my kids, and I tell my kids because of it, you can come back from anything. You can fail out of college and go back in and do it 10 times better There's no mistake, I mean, barring a few probably, but there's no mistake that you can't ever come back from. And I think that is something that my parents instilled in me. They always believed in me, whether I was bringing home an F in high school and they were like, "What are you doing? Like you're getting A's. You're used to getting all A's and now you're bringing home an F. Like what is happening?" And I just didn't. I went through this rebellious phase of not really caring. But they never gave up on me, and they just always believed that I could bounce back. And that's why I think it's so important to me as a parent to teach my child that you can bounce back from anything. And the important part is to just learn from that F you got. Okay, well, you got an F. Was it because you didn't study? Or was it because you studied, but maybe that study method doesn't really work for you? And maybe we need to try something else. But you need to persevere and just learn from the mistake. And it's okay. And, I think that's just I got it from my parents. And so I'm hopefully giving that to my kids that you can come back from that F. The one thing I struggle with as a mom is, I have one daughter, but how do I let her know that, hey, just because I left this big career and stayed home, how do I let her know? And how do I set the example for her that you don't have to do that? You can have a big career and you don't have to stay home with your kids. And she wants to be an astronaut, right? So how do I let her know that you can do that? And you don't need to feel bad if you don't stay home with your kids, because kids learn from us, right? Mm-hmm. They learn from seeing us. And so that is what I'm currently struggling with, is how do I let her know that just because she doesn't make the same choices that I made, that won't make her less of a parent.
Right. Because you've got that's that openness to it, right? So like your parents separate the value of you and the value of education. And so there's no bridge between those two. Like you are always at your core good, wonderful, valuable to them, and have like great, yay.
Right.
Globally.
Right.
What and also allowing you to fall on your face, but never at any point in time, like you get a bad grade on a test or a paper or whatever, you're not like, well, my parents don't care about me. Right. It's like, I did really crappy on that test. And I think that's the part that is something that I'm hoping we got away from. And I'm hoping that swings back. Like my kids, I say to them, a test is just a picture of where you are in time. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, if they tested you on like geometry and you haven't taken geometry yet, you're going to do poorly on the test because you don't know. Right. But if they test you and then you take geometry class starting the next day and then they test you again, you're going to do better. It doesn't have anything to do with how intelligent you are. It's just a grasp of the knowledge that they are giving you. So like this idea of kids being like, oh, I don't know anything. I'm dumb because blah, blah, blah. It's like it globally not true. But the thing about what you show in an example and how you talk about things is, I think when you say, this was my choice, I feel like that's where the strength in that is like your choice is to leave the career and choose a different path. But that doesn't mean you're not a lawyer. You're not all of those things. It's like, I did all of that and my path looks different, but that doesn't mean that my path is right.
Correct. And absolutely.
It's those conversations, I think, are what I'm hopeful for the generation of children that is growing up right now, because we have navigated this like do all, be all, and it's not true. And now we get to say, okay, I had to make a choice. Like you don't necessarily have to make a black and white choice, but there are choices along the way. So how do you make choices along the way that when you get to the end of the line, you are feeling like you lived that experience to the fullest? Like you could go back tomorrow and get a big law job and do all of that again. And I feel like that's not going to be any more significant for her than if you don't.
Right. And I think it's just about keeping the lines of communication open. Don't leave your kids guessing to, how you feel about them or how you feel about how they're doing, let them know. And also let them know when you've made a mistake. I tell my kids all the time, like they'll come to me and they know that, don't come to me whining. Come to me and talk to me and tell me, hey, mom, I know that you said this, but here is why I think differently. And then a lot of times, it's important that your kids see your fallibility. And a lot of times I'll say, you know what, you're right. Thank you for coming to me and phrasing it so eloquently and respectfully. And you were absolutely right. I was wrong in that scenario. And I think that that's important for kids to see because it lets them do it too. Yeah, I was wrong. Saying to a friend, hey, yeah, that was rude of me. I was wrong. Thanks for, coming to me and I'm sorry I hurt your feelings. So I think it's just all about setting the example and letting your kids know that you're not perfect and it's okay for them to not be perfect too.
Like when your kid turns to you and is like, Mom, how come I don't have this outfit for such and such? And you're like, well, because I forgot.
Right. Exactly.
You have mismatched socks because you forgot? That's fine. And
right.
It's, and I always say, like, I'm happy to be the bad guy. Like, you want to roll out there. And if it truly was on me and I dropped the ball, totally fine.
Yep.
Lay that out. Like, my mom forgot. It's not my mom forgot because my mom's a hot mess. It's my mom forgot because whatever. That's the part is like, my mom forgot because she's a human being.
Right. Just because people forget things sometimes. Just like, guess what? You're going to forget your homework at home sometimes. It happens. You do it. And at my kids' school, if they forget their homework, they get a homework referral. And so the parents have to sign it. And guess what? They'll never do it again because they hated getting called out and they hated having to bring it home and have me sign it. So, not a big deal. You'll learn from your, mistake. It'll happen.
Do you drive homework to school or lunch to school if they forget it?
No, I don't, just my own personal thing, but also the school my kids go to do not allow it. You can't do it. They think that kids just have to, deal with their mistakes. And I kind of like
very
it.
Texas.
I kind of like it because, listen, at the end of the day, you can buy lunch. These kids are not starving. And, guess what? They won't forget it next time. Mm-hmm. It lets kids learn the lesson of a mistake. It goes back to what we were talking about. It's letting kids learn that it's okay to make a mistake, but you'll learn from it. And, you're not always going to have a parent there to bring you your lunch or bring you your homework. That in college, it's probably not, mom is hopefully not living in the dorm with you, doing those things for you. So let's learn it when you're in 5th grade and not, in college.
When I was in grad school, I worked at the academic resource office. And so kids that were coming into school who had IEPs in high school and they had accommodations and all of those things. In August, before they got there, their parents would call the office and say, my so-and-so is coming in the fall and they have these accommodations, yada, yada. And the woman who answered the phone, the director, I don't know how she didn't lose her marbles. Every single phone call, like she's in there 8-10 hours a day, every single phone call, she was like, your child is an adult. If they need accommodations, they have to call and make their own arrangements for accommodations. These are the things we require, tell them to call me if they have questions. And they come out and I'd be like, oh my God, I cannot believe. And they're like, this is literally the job. My job at this point is I have to help parents, not children. I have to help parents understand that your kid is an adult. And as much as you want to be involved, legally, like your time is up. And whatever you've done to prepare them for this is the result. Like they can't say like, oh, hey, mom, did you call and get me my like extra math time or my extra test time? They have to call and say, these are the things I need and blah, blah. And they were they were wonderful with helping, incoming freshmen when they were calling and stuff like that. But oh my God, this lady, it was like I feel like she needed a button. Like, thank you for calling. Your child is an adult. They are responsible for their own accommodations.
Well, and it's a great lesson to learn. There's a time and a place when certainly a parent needs to step in and advocate for their child. But one of the other things that my kids' school does, which I think is fantastic, is they say, if your child is having an issue in class or, with homework or whatever, have them talk to the teacher first before you
Yes.
do. And I think that is such a great skill for kids to learn. And I love that the school and the teachers encourage that. And they also encourage it because when a child does go up to them, they're very receptive. They don't shut them down. And I think that positive feedback in them, advocating for themselves and getting a response teaches them, like when they go to college, they can go in and advocate for their own accommodations. And so I think it's great the way the school has partnered with the parents and saying, hey, hang on, don't email right away. Let your child try to figure it out first. And I think that's great.
Yeah, because I mean, really, at the end of the day, we're trying to raise humans, right? We're not trying
Right.
to raise, like, they're not going to stay that little forever.
I don't
Sometimes that's
want-
sad.
Right. I know for sure. But I don't want, a 40-year-old living with me where I have to advocate for them because their boss told them he didn't like some project. I'm not going to send their
Mom.
boss an email like, excuse me, my child is perfect. How dare you say those things to them? I'm not doing that. So you got to raise them to do it themselves.
Yeah, it's a launch. It's a ramp. It's not not a helicopter. It's an airplane that's taken off. So
right. And I always joke that, with becoming this part-time kindergarten aide at my kid's school, I'm like, it makes me look like the ultimate helicopter mom that I work at my kid's school, but I'm really not. And I tell people, I'm like, I promise I'm not. I'm not going to be bothering their teachers and oh, tell me I'm pretty much like a free range parent in a lot of ways. The kids have to make their own mistakes. They go out and play in the woods and, build forts and do all these things. And I'm not hovering over them. They ride bikes around the neighborhood. So I tell people, I'm like, I promise I'm not that super helicopter. I can't let go of my children. I got a job at their school so I could watch them all the time. That's not me. I promise.
I just like kids. I had many of them, and now I'm just hanging out with them. Oh my
right.
gosh.
Absolutely. So, I just feel like this is a good segue back to eventually I want to go back to lawyering. But right now, I have no idea how my family would pivot from me being able to drive everyone to all their after school activities and do all those things to mom's back in the workforce full time and I won't get off work until 5. And so this way I have a little something for me in that I enjoy this part-time kindergarten aide and I'm doing something for me, but the hours are the exact same as my children in school.
Mhm.
And then on the other 2 days, I can clean my house and do laundry and do all those other things. So I don't feel like I'm drowning. So
how do you see the transition going? When you do go back into law, because law feels like all or none in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
unless you hang your own shingle.
yeah, absolutely. I think it is all or none. My firm had a part-time option, but it's hard because as a lawyer, when you're working on cases, if the client emails you on a Tuesday, you can't be like, I'm sorry, I'm not working on Tuesday. Get back to me on Wednesday when it's my day in the office. That doesn't work. As a client,
Yeah.
I would even be like, what are you talking about? I'm paying you to represent me or,
Right.
so I couldn't figure out how a part-time gig would work. But so I have no idea. And I'm sure it'll be a complete disaster when we first do it. And I'm sure it'll be a rocky road. And I won't do it until I feel like my family is at a point where we wouldn't all drown if I launch myself back in there. So, I see maybe doing some contract work, doc review, things like that, just to kind of dip my toes back in the water. So we'll see. But I don't think we're there yet to throw myself into a big time career. But hopefully we will, because I miss it. And I'd love to do it, and I'd love to take that for me, but the family's not quite there yet.
Yeah, but that's amazing that you've got an option. You're
Yeah.
not you're not going to law school. You're
No.
not like,
Yeah.
oh, I'd like to do that. Like you checked a couple big boxes before.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think when I do go back, it'll be, I think my life history in between when I worked and now has taught me so much that what I went for originally, to be a civil litigator, now I'd love to do advocacy work, especially for, special needs children, things of that nature, because of what you learn and what I went through. All those things shouldn't be a luxury. Kids should be able to get the help they need, and parents shouldn't have to worry, well, do I put food on the table or do I take my child to speech, which they so desperately need? I think that's a heartbreaking decision. And so many families nowadays have to make that decision. And I think that that's heartbreaking, because while you can get all those services in school through these early childhood programs, at least in our case with, childhood apraxia of speech and global apraxia, that's not enough. That's not going to do it. The 60 minutes of speech is not going to do it. The 30 minutes of OT, that's not going to do it. You have to have all these additional things. And it was a luxury that thankfully, my husband does well. So we were able to do, but a lot of families don't have that, and they should. So that's my soapbox. I'll get off of it.
I love it. I think you should nail it to the floor. Don't slide that thing under any tables anytime soon, because I think that there is that pulling in of, your experience before having kids and seeing sort of the back end of the litigation side of things. And then having the lived experience is going to create a more richness to what you go back to.
Absolutely.
You're not trying to run back into the office to run back into the office. That helps move forward. And then that's the thing that people can see, right? So like, as you're talking about your daughter and staying home and stuff like that, if you had stayed in corporate, like big law in New York, would you have that same perspective? Because if somebody is bringing your kid to therapy, or, you're running around and doing all those pieces, but the gift of time and experience in the end creates a career that is much more in alignment with who you are and much more rich in terms of like the impact that you can have out in the world. And I feel like that's the message more than like, did I do the right thing because I stayed home? It's like staying home fed the direction of my career in a way that I could not have imagined. And now that I am in this direction, I can't imagine making those other decisions. So it's all like bricks in the pathway.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I think, a lot of people will talk about when you're jumping back in the workforce and, you're on LinkedIn and you see these job postings, and, people will talk about gaps in the resume and being a stay-at-home mom. And it's a little bit frustrating because me being a stay-at-home mom doesn't create a gap in my resume. It's just different. It's just unpaid work. And so these, I think we just need to look at these quote unquote gaps in the resume a little bit differently, in that they're not just me living on an island somewhere drinking margaritas, which would be amazing. That would probably be a gap in a resume. But
yep. Solid.
Doing right, exactly. I mean, and I'm not judging. That's amazing. If you can get that time to do that, by all means. But being a stay-at-home mom isn't a gap. It's just enriching your skills and your talents in a different way than being in a courtroom. And so as I leap back in and have to justify my 14-year gap in the resume, I hope to be able to convince people that it wasn't just me sitting on a beach drinking a margarita.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you've got and bringing all of that experience on the back end of navigating, care and navigating all of that can really be a big part of that story.
Yeah.
Well, I cannot wait to see where you go and where you end up, and if there's if there's anyone out there that is like, hey, looking for part-time litigator, maybe, right? I want a law firm. I want a law firm that is a parent-based law firm. One that like you sign and the understanding is like we are well qualified and we do the job, but we do the job on our own time. Like if you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday to go to work, no, like no one should ever have anything to say about dedication ever again. No, just a global no.
Global no.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And I'll put up links for Jennifer's book on the show notes. And I would love to put your LinkedIn there because people, I think the area that you're working in and working towards, it sounds like, I think there's a lot of people that can really identify with that in terms of a personal need and also a career kind of choice and direction. So thank you for
that sounds great. Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.